Okay, perfect.
Okay, we're going.
All right. Hello, my name is Nilu Famia, and I am from Detroit, Michigan. I have been an ABA for about 2 years now.
Hi, I'm Natasha. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana, and I've been working in ABA for about 6 months.
Hi, my name is Natalie Erdman. I have been in RBT for about 2 months. I'm working in a clinic-based center with kids ranging from 14 to 13 years of age.
Hi, I'm Tara Lindline. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I've been in RBT for 5 years, and I work in a nonprofit ABA clinic. I work with people 3 to 18 years old.
Hi, my name is Laura Solartola. I'm from Macomb, Michigan, and I'm 23 years old. I have worked as a behavior technician for 2 years, working with a clinic-based center from 2 to 18 years old.
So the title of our study is Video Self-Evaluation on Yoga Poses. So you may be thinking, why is yoga relevant? Why is our current study relevant? Many people think yoga is just meditating and stretching, but it's actually a lot more. There's many health benefits to yoga. This is true for healthy people and for diseased people as well. According to Ross and Thomas, practicing yoga regularly can have more positive effects on health conditions than any other form of exercising, like including cycling, running, jogging, those types of exercises. And going to a yoga class, if you're a beginner, can be pretty intimidating. One way to build confidence is practicing yoga before going to classes. An effective way to do that is video self-evaluation, and which can increase your accuracy of performing poses. Also, with video self-evaluation, getting that immediate feedback is very effective.
As Tara said, that immediate feedback does have a huge effect on performance in many different areas. There was a 2012 study where they looked at immediate feedback on stroke length and swimming time in participants. And this was an experimental study where they divided it in half, an experiment group and a control group. And they found that those in the experimental group who had received that immediate feedback had increased their stroke length as well as reducing their swim time. And it also prevented errors from occurring. So when they got that immediate feedback, they knew what to adjust the next time. And so there were less errors in their activity. And then also there was a 2010 study where they looked at immediate feedback from peer tutors for oral presentation skills of teens with learning disabilities. And they found that the immediate feedback was effective in decreasing target behaviors in these teens, which included speaking too quickly, rocking back and forth, or inflection with different statements. And compared to the group that had a delayed feedback, theirs was much improved.
The purpose of our study was to evaluate how video self-evaluation and video feedback procedures can enhance the accuracy of yoga poses.
The participants of the study were 3 graduate-level students in the Applied Behavioral Analysis program at Ball State University: Natasha, Tara, and Natalie. Each participant does not have much exposure to yoga and were interested in learning beginner yoga poses. The study was conducted in the comfort of the participants' own home, in which they recorded their poses and sent them to the researchers for further evaluation. Natasha was interested in this study because she was intrigued by video self-evaluation as well as the physical and mental properties of yoga. Tara wanted to participate in this study because she was interested in the effectiveness of self-evaluation and how it can change and improve accuracy in exercise and performance. Natalie was interested in this study because she wanted to see the effectiveness of video self-evaluation in an unfamiliar area of fitness. The researchers requested that each participant does not attend yoga classes or practice yoga from home outside of this experiment.
In the original article, the researchers used one Canon T3i single lens video camera a tripod, a memory card, an Acer laptop, an iTunes video playing software for feedback, yoga mats for the participants' use, and a task analysis. The Canon T3i single lens video camera was replaced by an iPhone camera or a laptop. A laptop was used for all participants to upload a video completing their poses on. Google Docs was used to store the video of each participant. The participants did not need to use a tripod or a memory card. The yoga mat is optional, but this will be encouraged to exhibit the poses, and a task analysis was provided to the group members to complete each yoga pose. 3 yoga poses were chosen for the study and involved the tree pose, warrior 2 pose, and downward facing dog. The tree pose is a balancing pose in yoga where one stands on one leg with arms raised above the head. The warrior 2 pose is a stretch pose where one stands with legs more than shoulder length apart and arms spread to each side of the shoulders. The downward facing dog is a stretch pose where one stands on hands and feet.
For each pose, the participants' behavior was recorded and scored by each other using the task analysis. The poses were recorded at different angles depending on the pose. Tree pose and warrior 2 pose were recorded from the front of the participants. Downward dog was recorded from the side of the participants. Behaviors in the task analysis for each pose were coded by the grader as correct or incorrect during the assessment sessions. The percentage of correct was calculated by dividing the number of correct steps by the number in the task analysis multiplied by 100.
So in our baseline, these yoga poses were chosen because there was a low probability that the acquisition of one pose would affect the acquisition of another. These are also very basic beginner poses that you would see in a beginner level class. So it was likely that they would be easier to complete on a task analysis for us people who have not as much experience with yoga. And so the participants worked on these target behaviors with a task analysis. And the first 2 sessions at baseline were just watching our model videos to get familiar with the poses as well as familiarizing ourselves with the task analysis. And then our 2 researchers collected data using a Likert scale until there was stability in each of our baseline, and then they let us know when we could move on to the intervention stage once they had seen the stability.
Intervention phase was participants recording a video of themselves and then immediately after scoring their performance on a task analysis. Since we use a multiple baseline design, we started with tree pose first, and then after there was stability and a criteria of 80% and higher for 3 data points or more, then you can move on to the subsequent pose, which was warrior 2, then downward facing dog. If a participant was failing to hit the 80% accuracy, then they receive extra feedback with the researchers to help increase their performance on the poses.
For IOA data, we use total IOA, which is calculated by using the smaller count over the larger count multiplied by 100 to get the total count IOA percentage. So there were 2 observers that we used that were dedicated to IOA, and 30% of baseline and intervention for each participant was calculated. For our participant, Natasha, the mean IOA percentage for maintenance was 98%. The IOA range for maintenance was 96 to 100%. And the intervention mean IOA percentage was 97%. And the IOA range percent for intervention was 91 to 100%. For Tara, the maintenance for mean IOA percentage was 97%. For IOA range percentage for maintenance was 94 to 100%. For intervention, the mean IOA percentage was 98%, and for IOA range percentage for intervention was 94 to 100%. And our third participant, Natalie, we had a mean IOA percentage for maintenance at 97%. For IOA range percent for maintenance was 93 to 100%. Intervention mean IOA percent was 98%, and then the IOA range percent for intervention was 93 to 100% as well.
For treatment fidelity, we used a smartphone to set up the camera, and we ensured that the positioning was correct for each pose. For tree pose and warrior 2 pose, it was recorded from the front of the participant. For the downward dog pose, it was recorded from the left side of the participant. We ensured that the video model had been watched prior to recording the pose. We made sure that when the scoring on the task analysis, each step was followed and graded impartially. For video feedback, we made sure that self-evaluation was being conducted immediately following the recording of the pose. So for my results, for tree pose, my baseline mean was 85%, and my intervention mean was 79.6%. Intervention for this phase was extended due to not reaching the 80% or higher for 3 data points. Once the 3 data points were above 80%, the participant was able to move into maintenance. For warrior 2, my baseline mean was 89.27%, and my intervention mean was 100%. This pose transitioned quickly from intervention to maintenance. For downward dog, the baseline mean was 96.42%, and the intervention mean was 96%. This one also transitioned quickly from intervention to maintenance.
The baseline for Tara for my tree pose was 99.4%, and then intervention moved up to 100%. For warrior 2 pose, my baseline mean was 65.6% and moves up to 95.7% in intervention. And for my downward dog, baseline was 91.7% and 100% in intervention phase. For my results, you can see that warrior 2 pose showed the relationship of the intervention because I have a change in level and my accuracy increased after intervention phase. But for tree and downward dog, I already hit mastery criteria in baseline.
So in my results, my tree baseline was a 92.6, and then when I went to intervention, it decreased down and I had to extend my intervention, but I underestimated it because of math, and my intervention mean was actually only a 76.3, and then it increased again in maintenance. And then for my warrior pose, my mean was a 92.5, and that won the intervention. It increased it to a 95.3, and I didn't have to spend as long of time in the intervention like the tree pose. And then same with my downward dog, I had met a average of 94.1 in my baseline, and then in my intervention, it didn't last very long, and my average was a 97.6.
So the discussion for our project was the findings from the study conducted did show that video self-evaluation can lead to increase in performance. The study allowed the student to record themselves performing and then reviewing the recording of to self-evaluate. Due to the improvements that were noticed in the results, in the future third parties such as coaches could be eliminated. That usually help with improving, whereas right now when you record, you can easily just go back, look at your recordings and evaluate yourself, see where you made a mistake and where you didn't, and you can use that feedback to increase your performance. Using a task analysis along with video modeling, it can increase the performance, and which can later be improved using video recording, self-evaluation. Though the results did show positive improvements in performance, more research needs to be conducted in regard to video self-evaluation.
Within our study, we did have a few limitations. The results of the study suggested that the sample size was too small. It did not have a large impact on implications of the research. Although the results were positive, the participants disclosed they were athletic or had slight experience with yoga. Future research should evaluate these findings before allowing the participants to partake in the study. Another limitation includes the participants having past experience with the task analysis. As everyone said earlier, they are RBTs or behavior technicians. So this is shown in the participant's baseline before moving into intervention with video self-evaluation. We heard Natalie, Natasha, and Tara all talk about how they reached master criteria before they even went into intervention. So the participants were able to acquire this skill by reaching 100% before even going into the intervention phase. The researchers had a limited rating scale that evaluated the participants on how well they understood and performed the beginning and ending of each pose. Meanwhile, the participants evaluated each step individually. So future research should evaluate the task analysis, the research rating scale, and video self-evaluation scale to use the same steps in the recording process to move phases. This study was to assess the video self-evaluation procedure with beginner level poses. Adding this component to the study limits the researchers' findings and increases observer drift. Future research should evaluate the effectiveness of this procedure for enhancing performance in the participants and limit self-bias. Earlier, we did hear Natalie talk about how math was confusing. So that is also another limitation that we have added. We do need to make sure that we are doing math correctly and making sure that we're triple checking everything. But sometimes math just goes over our head, or we don't do it correctly on our calculators. So making sure that we're doing our math correctly will help our limitations in the future. And here are our references. Thank you for joining our presentation. The floor is now open to any questions.
All right, awesome. I have just a few questions. I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit more, just give a little bit more detail about what the Likert scale scoring process looked like.
On the task analysis?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you were talking about your methods, you said that the items were scored on a Likert scale, and I was just wondering, is that like for every item of the task analysis, or was it a total number? If you could just clarify a little bit there.
So for our baseline, we had 2 researchers that looked at the videos that our participants sent us, and we had a rating scale that talked about whether they performed like a expert, and that was ranged from 1 to 5, and we 0 to 5, I believe, and 5 being the best and then 0 being not the best. So using that, there was a total of 30 points that they could earn, and from that we calculated whether they got 4 and then added it and got a, say if they got a 28 out of 30, we got a percentage to give them for the baseline. And then for the intervention, each task analysis was broken down by step, and there was about 15 to 16 steps depending on the pose, and then same way they received a plus or a minus, which they then added the plus as 1 point and then the minus as 0, and then got a percentage from the divided by the 15 or 16, and then got a percentage that was used.
Okay, gotcha. So a couple of other questions. Several of you guys met mastery criteria during baseline for some of your poses, and I was wondering if you thought, I know that you said you chose the poses that you chose because they were likely to not influence the acquisition of another pose, but I'm not super skilled or experienced in yoga, but I think these are all pretty like foundational poses, and so yeah. What do you think would have happened if you would have chosen more complicated poses?
I feel like we probably wouldn't have met that mastery criteria in that baseline phase for the poses, and then depending on what the task analysis looked like for more advanced poses, we either would have spent more time in intervention, like more than just 3 sessions, and maybe had to go into that feedback with the researchers instead of just relying on the self-evaluation. Since they are more advanced poses, someone else could be like, hey, you're not doing this correctly, and then it would help increase those scores.
Okay. Natalie, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your graph. I know you alluded to difficulties with math. I just want to hear a little bit more details about why you think your performance was lower in intervention for that first pose than it was in baseline.
Yeah, I think it was, so in the baseline, we used that Likert scale where Larissa and Nalufa scored me on, and so that was higher. It was a different scale. And then when I went into intervention with the task analysis, I was able to see like things I was doing wrong. And one thing I know for me was those first couple of ones, I wasn't able to hold it for the 30 seconds as the task analysis described. And so it took me a little longer to be able to hold that balance for 30 seconds. And so then it increased after I spent more time practicing the balance. And then I was looking at it and I was like, oh, I'm at the 80%. But then when I went back and redid my math and working on the graph again, I realized I was just below that 80%. So I probably, if it had been caught sooner, would have gone into that second intervention phase to increase it more.
Okay. Was the baseline then, do you think, an accurate representation of what your performance was like during baseline, or was there some type of error?
For the other poses it was, but for the tree pose, since my scores were a bit off, I think it would have been, if I had designed this study, I would have done a task analysis for the researchers and a task analysis for the participants. That way everything is the same, because one person can strongly agree, yeah, this is an expert, but when you break it down into those smaller steps on a task analysis, you looking at yourself can be like, no, I actually didn't get that step. And so the Likert scale had, I think, was it 8 questions, whereas the task analysis for the tree pose had 15.
Okay.
Yeah. It was
6 questions.
6 questions, and it was literally like, did they start the beginning correctly? Did they end correctly? Did they look like an expert? And do they know what they're doing?
Okay. And that's not what the outcome measure was then for the intervention phase?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It was a typical task analysis, step by step.
Yeah.
Broken down.
Stand with your feet 2 to 3 inches apart, bring your hands to the hips, and like it broke down every single movement throughout the pose, whereas that Likert skill is only, do they look like they know what they're doing? Do they
Exactly.
did they end right?
Yeah. So yeah, it sounds like you guys definitely picked up on that limitation that that it's, you know, hard to even determine a functional relationship or any treatment effect when your measurement systems are inconsistent across phases. So yeah. I also wanted to know, as we're talking about measurement systems and scoring, you mentioned one of your limitations was observer drift, and I was just wondering why that would be relevant if your IOA was an acceptable level.
So the observer drift, I really just talked about that because of what we talked about with between baseline and intervention. So with baseline, we didn't have as many questions as they had. So when we went into intervention, we saw, you know, there could have been decreases because they were scoring themselves differently than we were scoring. We saw them, you know, say, okay, well, if I could only hold it for 29 seconds and not 30, I'm going to give myself a minus. Meanwhile, like, I probably would have been like, okay, that's a plus because it 1 second off, like, okay, are we really going to put that on them? Or, you know, I remember talking about it in one of our groups, our group meeting, I think last week, we were talking about how they were a little bit harder on themselves than they probably should have been, or they were lighter on themselves than they should have been. So I feel as if we all watched every single video instead of just relying on the video self-evaluation and all of that, like it definitely wouldn't have been like as big as an observer drift. Maybe we could have been like, okay, this is actually how it's supposed to be, or any of that. So I wouldn't say that it's 100% observer drift because it's not like we're looking at the at every single behavior and like not everybody's looking at the exact same definition. We're all watching the same videos, or we're all watching or looking at the same task analysis. But with how everybody was rating themselves, it just didn't seem the same. Like Natasha could have rated herself a little bit lighter than Natalie did. Natalie could have been a little harsher on herself than Tara, and Tara could have been like right in the middle, like, okay, I did it, so I'm just going to give myself a plus. So that's how I was looking at observer drift.
Okay. Did you take IOA both during intervention and baseline?
Yes. So we took IOA. For the baseline IOA, it was Larissa and I as the researchers. And for IOA, it was either her or I, and the scoring that each participant did to get IOA. So it was 2 people at least.
During the intervention
Yeah.
phase. So if that was the case, if 2 people were scoring, wouldn't it control for those things that Larissa just mentioned with scoring?
Sorry, I kind of cut off for a second.
Yeah, so if you had 2 people, so Larissa just kind of explained the factors that you guys feel like influenced observer drift, that you were maybe your measurement system wasn't as sensitive and there's variability in how each of you were scoring it. If there was 2 people scoring IOA and your IOA was high, wouldn't that have like controlled for that, whether a person was like being biased in their scoring?
Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, just something to think about. That's really the reason. I mean, one of the reasons that we have IOA data is to make sure that the scoring is accurate. And so either your IOA measures weren't sensitive to the validity of the data, or your data truly were reliable. I also just wanted to point out with one of your limitations too, that I think it's a common misconception that a small sample size is a limitation or problematic. And while that's definitely true for like groups design, and I think that's where a lot of people get that misconception, is that in any type of groups design, we're using like statistical analyses. Like that's like one thing that they always teach you in statistics classes, is that like you need to have a larger sample size to make sure that your data are accurate and that they're representative of the population. And in ABA, we primarily rely on single case designs, and so it's not necessarily that it's a small sample size that makes it a limitation, because you could have a multiple baseline across behaviors and only have a single participant, and you can still show experimental control. The way that I would rather interpret that limitation is that potentially it's a limitation in your like your generalizability of your sample. It's not that it's too small of a sample, but maybe you all are of a similar age range or similar demographics, and so in that way the results that you got may not be generalizable to all of the different populations that exist out there. And so I just wanted to point that out, that as you're getting more exposed to single case designs, that only a few participants isn't necessarily a bad thing. You think about kind of like the other factors that impact your generalizability.
That makes sense.
And I think that's what we're trying to get across. Yeah, like it, we're all in the same field. We all know what a task analysis is. We all have that. So if we had a larger sample size where like my friends who don't even know what ABA is could do it, rather than just like all of us. So
same with, we're all females in our mid 20s, and all of our participants were white females as well. So then that could be generalized to other white females in our age range, but not males per se.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, great. That's all I have. You guys can go ahead when you're wrapped up, posting it to your assigned discussion board and then submitting to the Dropbox that's in module 16. Just submit the link and I'll get your grade entered.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.